Hello and welcome to China Focus. I'm Shelley Zhang. Corruption in China, it's a big problem, and even China's top leader Hu Jintao said so in his recent speech to the 18th Party Congress. But is it the biggest problem facing China? Could it lead to the fall of the party and the state? Here to talk about this, we have Jason Ma and Matt Ganesta. So let's talk about Hu Jintao's speech. Now, it's not the first time that corruption has been brought up as a huge problem for the party. And similarly, there was a warning about this 10 years ago at the last power transition. It seems that they keep calling it a serious problem, but they're not really doing anything serious to address it.
They kind of, I guess, because this time bring it up because it's something they constantly have to bring up to make people feel like they are doing something. And of course, the major kind of in context is the Bo Xilai's case. They do see huge corruption involved, and also the leader of the previous railway head. It's kind of a Liu Zhijun's case. Both cases are very high profile and they have huge consequence, a big number involved. And so I guess they bring it up every year and then they bring it up, especially need to bring it up in this context.
Well, I mean, Bo Xilai and Liu Zhijun were high-profile cases, but they're just really a drop in the bucket. There's so many corruption cases. Every year there's between 130 and 190,000 Communist Party officials who are disciplined for malfeasance of some kind. But only about 6% of them end up with any kind of criminal prosecution, and only half of them end up going to jail. So corruption's a massive problem, but only maybe 3% of officials end up going to jail for it.
So, Hu Jintao said in his speech that, if we fail to handle the issue well, it could prove fatal to the party, and it could even cause the collapse of the party and the fall of the state. So is it that serious?
Well, I think he's actually trying to confuse two things. He's trying to confuse the party and the state. The corruption itself is also not the fundamental issue. It's kind of like, let's talk about how bad corruption is, and then we can talk about eliminating corruption, and then we don't have to deal with the things that are beneath the surface that are causing that corruption. But ultimately, there's a lot of structural issues within the party that are allowing this corruption to happen on a rampant scale. And that's the party's problem. It's not so much the state's problem, because the state has its own sort of system. And the problem is the state can't operate independently because it's controlled at every level by the party. The appointments of the personnel in the government are controlled by the party. What the different government officials can do is also essentially dictated by the party. How, the degree to which they can carry out their function, what the scope of their function is, and so on, is all determined by the party. So when you have corruption within the party, it dramatically affects the state. But the party and the state are not the same thing. And I think what Hu Jintao wants to do is plant this idea in people's minds that, if the party falls, then it's also going to cause a collapse of the state. But that's not necessarily the case.
So you're saying the party and the state, if the party fell, the state could keep running?
I think so, because the party right now is kind of something kind of attached to the state. The state they do have their own functional organs, like all the other things. It's just like the party is controlling every part of things. You take away the party, the state can still run. But of course, that's not a major kind of thing we are talking about. The major thing here is what really make Chinese right now unhappy. What's the real thing? I mean, if you ask most of Chinese, they will answer you in a way like, oh, the house is too expensive, I can't buy it. All the environmental issue became so serious, I can't breathe. All the food, I can't eat anywhere. All something like, I don't know how can I kind of survive when I'm old because there's no pension system over there. All the kind of the medical system, all this kind of thing. It's not kind of the things like they will point to, oh, I'm unhappy because of my kind of company leader is a corrupted official. No, it's not like that. So basically it's already get to the point where it's not a couple of people's corruption make people unhappy. It's more about the whole systematic kind of environment, the whole structural thing make people unhappy.
So are you saying that corruption is not the biggest problem for China
people
right now?
already accepted it. Like, in 1989, there is kind of a Tiananmen incidents, Tiananmen Square incidents. At that moment, people's slogan is get rid of corruption. And because at that moment they do see all those leaders, the son was kind of using their power to buy things cheaper and sell things more expensive in that way. But now everything changed. It's already all the leaders' son and relatives, they already run the huge company, and then the company is protected by the law, and meanwhile the company itself is squeezing every part of the Chinese people legally. So it's already not, you can't say their relatives is corrupted, but they do run everything legally, but they are squeezing the society. It's more a systematic issue, a structural issue.
I think, one of the biggest problems is, as Jason mentioned, there's structural problems, and it's very difficult for the party to fight corruption because of the structural system. For example, the party has repeatedly said again and again that it won't allow a Western-style separation of powers, even calling such a thing a sort of, decadent bourgeoisie mentality. Separation of powers.
What kind of separation of powers are you talking?
Well, like in the United States, you have the judicial branch of government is separate and independent from, the executive and legislative branches, and so the courts essentially can be the ultimate arbiters of behavior on the part of officials in the U.S. or really anybody. But in China, it's not structured like that. The court system is not independent of the Communist Party. There's actually kind of two court systems. You have the Discipline Inspection Committee, which is sort of the equivalent of like a military tribunal, except that it's less legal based. In other words, it's kind of the party has its own internal system just for party members. And if it determines that a party member is bad, not necessarily criminally, but politically bad, then it can expel them from the party and send them to the criminal court.
So it's kind of what we saw happen with Boxilai.
Right, exactly. And then, but even the court system at the state level is also not independent. Firstly, it's supervised by the National People's Congress, but that's sort of a rubber stamp system anyway. The civil court system is directly controlled by the party. The head of China's Supreme People's Court, Wang Shengjun, this guy, he doesn't even have a law degree. He's got a degree in history, and he studied at the Beijing Party School. The guy without a law degree is head of China's Supreme Court. It doesn't make any sense. And even he is a party member, but even he's not the real leader of the court system. The real leader is this guy, Zhou Yongkang, who's retiring, but he's the head of the PLAC, the Political and Legislative Affairs Committee. And that sits at a high level of the Communist Party, currently at the Politburo Standing Committee. And even if it changes a little bit in the leadership transition, it'll still be extremely powerful and still control the courts. What this means is the courts in China are completely controlled by the party, and the party's own system is also controlled by the party's top leaders. So it's kind of like there's like, say, a mafia problem in a certain city in the US, and you say, okay, you guys need to eliminate all the illegal things you're doing, and we're going to leave it to you to discipline yourselves. Is that going to work? Of course it's not going to work. You have to have something independent, but because the party won't allow independence, it becomes impossible to have true reform of that system.
Right, I guess basically it's more like they said they want to use law to regulate a lot of things in China. They want, in this report they also mentioned that, but definitely it's impossible in the sense of, because different level of Chinese official, they are so involved with local economic activities. And meanwhile, they control every part. They control media, they control court, they control police. So in this way, it's almost impossible for them to really kind of execute the law according to the law. Definitely they will execute the law according to their personal interest. So everything is connected. I mean, corruption is connected, and rule by people, not rule by law, is kind of connected to this thing. And when you are not changing this political structure, you are talking about you want to get rid of corruption, you want to get rid of, make the rule of law in every part of Chinese people's life. It's kind of just kind of joke.
So is there a way to fix the problem?
I guess a clear way to fix problem, a lot of people talking about reform, but the current kind of result, the statement in the 18th Congress clearly sent a message out. There's no reform. The reform will not happen. And so they will keep doing this patch thing. They will keep doing this propaganda thing. So they hope by doing this more patching or propaganda to make sure the economy still can move forward. Meanwhile, the West kind of interest group still can gain what they want to gain from the system, and so that they can maintain this thing for a few years. I think even those party members, they don't think this system can work. That's the reason so many people send their relatives, kids, wife to U.S., including Bo Xilai. His son was sent to U.S. I mean, basically, all this kind of thing clearly saying they are at the survival mode. They are not really kind of, as they claim, they want to thrive. They are surviving, and they want to control one day after another. They don't really plan something 10 years later.
The Shanxi party secretary said last Friday, he said, we've now elevated it, being corruption, to a life or death issue for the party. So that shows you the degree of seriousness. But even the things that they can do are going to be extremely low level. I mean, for example, you could say, okay, local officials are corrupt because their compensation is so low. I mean, even Bo Xilai, the party secretary of Chongqing, was only earning about $1,600 a month. So officials are paid very little, and they're incentivized to be corrupt. The local governments don't have enough tax revenue, so they're incentivized to do these kind of land grabs. So you can kind of fix them by shifting around, how money is allocated, for example. But it's not going to fix the deeper structural problem, because in order to end corruption, you have to have an independent monitor. The Communist Party really its power rests on four pillars, you could say. The military, personnel appointments, the court system, and the press. But the only way to really root out corruption is you have to have an independent press that can expose it. You have to have an independent court system that can expose it. And it'll also affect personnel appointments, because you can't appoint someone who's corrupt. And so you're basically knocking out most of their legs, and that's going to cause a collapse of the party. So to really go after corruption, the measures they'd have to take are so extreme. I mean, they're to be normal in the West, but they seem so extreme in China that it basically could cause a collapse of the party. So they're only going to go so far. And right now, they've only really gone as far as rhetoric.
But I don't think corruption is a major issue. I mean, they just use the corruption as a straw man. Basically, they know Chinese people are unhappy. I mean, they really think kind of cheat Chinese people to the way like, oh, you are unhappy just because we have a few corrupted official. We get rid of them, you will be happy. So basically, they avoid talking about all these structural things. The thing require political reform. They talk about the corruption, and then use corruption to the way like limited the whole unhappiness to a couple of corrupted officials. So
now that Bo Xilai is not in the party anymore, Chinese people can be happy, right?
I think right. I mean, that's kind of can be the case. But I know there is nothing changed, because everything people are facing are still there. The high price of everything, and the inflation, and also kind of the evenness of the distribution of money, everything are still there. So basically, when they talk about corruption, I think they are changing the topic. They are cheating people, make people focus on something unimportant, and so that they can avoid talking about something really important, really is the fundamental solution to the current situation, which is some kind of a political reform or something.
Well, thank you both for joining us and giving us your analysis on this issue. And thank you for watching. For more on this and other topics in China, join us at ntd.tv.